Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of the Liberian History Channel. My name is Dennis Jai. I'm presenting this on Focus on Liberia, and we are broadcasting from Atlanta, Georgia. Today is part 3 of the topic, the birth of the African Republic, and we're going to be discussing law, order, sovereignty, and subjection. The presenter here on the Liberian History Channel is FOL Public Policy Analyst and also our historian, Madam Call Famule. Call, welcome to Focus on Liberia.
Thank you, Dennis, for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
And how's your Saturday going? And as a mom, I know you have a lot of things to do, but
as a mom, as a wife, as a Georgian, it was a really nice day today. Great weather. Everything's compared to yesterday, it was really nasty out. So we got out here and enjoyed ourselves.
Good. And we're here for another edition of the Liberian History Channel. This is where we eat, drink, and sleep history, or Liberian history. And so we are glad to be here. We want to welcome all our viewers from across the globe, especially in the mother's land. We are very encouraged that people in Liberia are listening even as late as midnight. And we are getting messages that we should keep this going because, Carl, what are you hearing about the History Channel from home?
Well, I'm getting a lot of positive feedback from Liberia, which makes me really happy. I'm glad that that's happening. I will say that it's kind of a mixed bag because a lot of people don't have computers. So the slideshow that we're doing, they can't see that well on the phone. So I did make one little adjustment. I tried to make the slides less wordy. So hopefully people can at least, follow along a little bit better. So I've been a TA, but I've not been really lecturing in a virtual way like this before.
Thank you. Again, we are happy to be here. To all viewers across the globe, we say welcome, share the show, invite someone, and tell somebody about the Liberian History Channel. Also, tell other historians that there's something going on that we all need to be a part of. Pretty soon, we are putting plans together so that we can have this in Liberia to reach the length and breadth of the country as far back as behind God's holy back where I was born. I want people in my hometown to get the history of our country. For the past, the last 2 episodes, we talk about in this the birth of the African Republic, and we're talking about Liberia. We started with those things that were happening at that time, on the Cape of Masurado, Ducor, and how people started coming. With the last edition, we're talking mainly about the various ships and how people came. Who were the people that were coming to Liberia? We talk about the repatriated Africans or the recaptured Africans. We talk about the African Americans or the Americo-Liberians, and all these people coming, in the different ships. It was an eye opener for most of us that it was not just few ships or 2 ships, but a lot of ships that went to Liberia over years.
Yeah.
And so today we're going to continue now, and this is all within how and why the Republic of Liberia was established. We're going to be looking at today, wherever people are, you should have law and order. You should have they came up with their own sovereignty, or the sovereign Africans, as Carl likes to call them. And also, they are establishing the country Liberia now with that sovereignty. And also, what happened during those formative years. That's what we're going to be talking about. Again, invite your friend and let's do it. Carl, just give her, I made an attempt to give her a summary of, within 3 minutes, give her a summary of what we discussed and where we are going today.
So the first, and this is just a general overview. We're not really getting into depth. So I don't want people to think that the information I'm presenting is a detailed picture. I'm just giving a general overview of what transpired, and then later on, in future episodes, we can look at specific issues in better detail. It is really important that people understand the timeline, the context of what happened. So I am drawing everything kind of on a continuum, and we began with the how, who lived at Cape Mesurado. We started who visited and who interacted, who traded with people at Cape Mesurado. So we started the program in the 1400s with the Sintra and the Portuguese, and how all of these places got their names. Why Wakonka was called Cape du Monde, and now we call it Cape Mount. And Cape Mesurado. Montserrado is a mispronunciation of Mesurado, and then you got the Cavala. These are all Portuguese names. When it's that, we talked about the King Peters of Cape Mesurado, that dynasty. We talked about different possibilities and why they were called King Peter. Was it just because they admired, a Dutch a settler that was there, or were they the biological descendants of the Dutch settlers? So those were things that we talked about. Then the second episode, we got into details about what was happening in the world when ACS was established, what was happening there in the United States specifically, and with Great Britain and the stopping the transatlantic slave trade in 1808, the repatriation amendment to the Slavery Act, which gave the ACS and the U.S. government the legal instrument, the legal right to remove recaptured Africans and liberated captives, which are recaptured Africans, and free Blacks, free African Americans born in America. So now we're going to get into the details of what happens when these people arrived on the coast, and that's what we're talking about today, and the laws and the rules that were set up that they had to live by, who set up the rules, and then we can look at some of the rules in detail, and then we'll talk about a subjection, which is basically being semi what's the word? You're not really free if you're subjected, right? So you're subjected to rules that you yourself don't make and you don't control. And then we're going to also talk about sovereignty, what that means. Because I think there's a lot of confusion around sovereignty. There's this belief that, because they were free, they weren't enslaved, that they were sovereign, and that is not the case. You can be. I mean, it's almost like saying, when there's colonialism, that the people are free. Well, they're not slaves, but they're not sovereign. They're under subjugation. They're under subjection. And in the unfortunate case of Liberia, the subjection was basically to a corporation, which started out as a private organization and became a corporation, actually, right. Almost extracting wealth and resources. So we're going to get into that a little bit.
And that corporation is the American Colonization Society.
Yes, and all the other sister colonization societies before they went under one umbrella.
Yeah, thank you. And Carl, just before we get started, I want to say this, maybe generally how you feel, because there is a lot that we don't know about Liberian history, and most of what we heard is, I don't want to say misinformation, but there's a lot of controversy. And so because the way things were in the country and what happened from 1822 to 1980 and after, so there are some blind spots in Liberia, and there are some uncomfortable things that we don't like to say or we don't like to talk about, because you may be seen as maybe divisive or favoring this group over the other. How do you feel, unearthing these things and letting, kind of telling us and educating people and sometimes discussing them as a whole? How do you feel, and how does that make you feel sometimes? And I believe you get some feedback as well.
I do. I'm very proud of our history. There's a lot of, horror. The thing is, the history is not a fairy tale. And, people like to always reference America and all these places. These places did, terrible things. America, gave birth to genocide, really. And so we like to compare, Liberia. We say things like, we had apartheid. It's absolutely not true. We didn't have apartheid. Apartheid is a system of laws. So a lot of times people they want to discuss, classism and discrimination. They use these extreme words. because they don't know really what happened. They don't know the details. And so, but personally, I look at history as a whole. I am an Africanist, and and what is an Africanist? An Africanist is an African person who basically sees the world as an African person. That sounds ridiculous, but it is true, because what happens to a lot of us when we become educated is we start to see the world through the eyes of the people that educated us, and not through our own any longer. So our perspective is not focused on what our people were doing and what our people were thinking. It's focused on what the people who are educating us think about us. We see ourselves, our culture, and everything through the eyes of other people, and that's unfortunate. So I intentionally focus on our story. So this is our history, and it's extremely important that we understand this as Liberian people, because if we allow people who hold us in contempt, people who exploited us, people who didn't believe that we were good enough or intelligent enough to do anything on our own, if we allow them to frame the story or skew the story to glorify themselves and demonize us. And when I say us, I'm talking about African people. This includes the repatriated Africans and the African Americans. If we allow people who exploited us collectively to create this skewed view that they were the saviors, when clearly they were not, and even in their own words, they held us in contempt. What starts to happen is we have this division, and we start to see each other as perpetrators or some kind of conquerors. And so in some cases that's true. In some cases it's not true. In some cases, indigenous people cooperated with slave dealers to fight abolitionists. And in other cases, the settlers, like what happened with Governor Finley and Buchanan, worked with slave dealers and the colonial people to fight innocent people because they were accused of killing Governor Finley. And they wiped out a whole village, a whole settlement of people because they thought that they had murdered Governor Finley. So these are stories we'll get into in the future, but there's no group of people that bears responsibility or that's innocent. Human beings are complicated, and there were a lot of things that happened over time. But overall, Liberia, the existence of Liberia, the fact that there's still a flag and this country still exists, is a testament to the strength and tenacity of many, many people. Existing as a state today, even in our current condition, is a miracle because of all of the obstacles that were intentionally put up. A lot of the things that happened to us was calculated, and we don't really we don't do a lot of studying, so we don't know. Right? We don't know what to tell the ambassador when he says, why is Liberia like this? We don't know to tell him, hey, tell us how much the United States has benefited from exploiting our people, because we don't know.
And that goes back to history, right? And
It does.
There are a few things in history, or talking to you and other historians, that I've learned. Dr. Brewer always told me, Dennis, you don't read history backwards.
No.
And you repeated those same sentiments as well. And you just mentioned that human beings are complicated. The issues we're talking about are complex. So it is not easy to understand them, to say, well, this is just one single factor contributing to this. Or we can look at the United States and Liberia 1822 like the United States we have today.
Yeah.
You cannot look at the war that took place in Liberia, and that's my favorite example, is you can look at, so if social media existed in 1990, the war wouldn't have been this devastated. So it is not right to picture the Liberian Civil War as if it's happening today.
Yeah.
So things, we need to look at things within that context. Yesterday, it was on Thursday, I was doing a show on transitional justice, and people calling for war crimes, and someone wrote and said, Well, after the American Civil War, there was no war crime court, and now the people are happy. The society is thriving, and everything is just good, right?
Right.
So trying to compare America at that time, this and then Liberia today, and so since there was no war crimes court in in America, there shouldn't be in Liberia, as if the two societies are the same. So it reminded me of the history that we continue to do that. If you look at these things within the time they were happening, the people, the culture, and everything else, then you won't just be quick to make that comparison.
Exactly.
Let's get started on today and get a friend, invite a friend, let's go into history. And we have a PowerPoint here that we want to use to make the presentation. Call is all yours.
All right. So thank you, Dennis. I'm going to actually pull up my copy so I can see better. All right, so we're on the title page. I tried to make this look better. Sorry if, if it doesn't. I try to use colors that were kind of, popping a little bit. All right, so this is basically just the title page. I just took an old ACS, African American Colonization Society, the African Repository is their journal that they published for many years. So this is a cover for one of my favorite ones, which is the earlier ones I really enjoy because it's primary source information. There's letters that were being written by people who were alive at the time and being published. This one is from 1822. So this is volume 1 that was done in September. So we can go to the next slide. So the title, again, we talked about this a little bit: Law, Order, Subjection, and Sovereignty. So this is going to be, so I'm going to start with Reverend Daniel Cooker, although he didn't end up going to Liberia, and he was a reverend. He considered himself African. He was mixed race, European American and African American, and as we've discussed previously, when your mother is a slave, you're a slave. So his mother was born into slavery, and his father was a plantation owner. So he was born a slave, but his father, basically liberated him. Get out of here, go somewhere and learn. Some of the mulattoes that were liberated, it was because they were the biological children of the owner of the plantation. And in other cases, they kept them enslaved until their deaths. They didn't care. So in his particular case, very brilliant man. He has a journal. He kept a very meticulous journal on board the Elizabeth. Most of what we know that transpired on the Elizabeth, we know from Daniel Cooker's journal. He chose to remain in Sierra Leone. An important fact about Daniel Cooker is that the first, so I don't know how much people know about U.S. history, but the Mayflower, there was before the people landed, they had like a pact, like a contract about how they were going to govern. Even the Maryland Colonization Society, before they even bought the first piece of land, they already had a contract set up, a pact about how they were going to govern. No such pact has ever been found about on the Elizabeth. So this is important because they got to Sierra Leone and things were not really organized as they should have been. And we talked about that already, and all this mass death that occurred, the sickness, and then you had, two people we'll talk about soon renege on their promise or their agreement to give them land. The agreement has also, for Sherbro, has also disappeared. So the land that was originally purchased in Sierra Leone for them to land on, not only did they get sick, they also we don't have a record of it. The assumption is that it was similar to what happened at Cape Mesurado. But Cooker chose not to go forward with ACS, and he had good reason to. It was because, they had the mindset that they were governing. They were the ones that were going to control and make decisions. They were the rulers, to keep it in very simplistic terms. And the settlers, or the immigrants, as they were called, the immigrants, both African-born and American-born African people, were supposed to basically live under their rules and their laws. And these rules and laws were not created with the consultation of the African people. When I say African, I want you all to know I'm talking about African Americans and repatriated captives. So they didn't consult them. These were some, lawmakers in America. They were some private business owners. So these were the rich and powerful people in the American society who had gotten together and decided that they were going to put a set of rules together when they sent these people, and they were going to live under these rules. But again,
and Carl, what was informing that mindset that the people you are making the rules for shouldn't be consulted? They were not part of it.
So it's not even that. It was never even a thought in their minds, because you're talking about a time period where the world is ascribing to, this theory of white supremacy. They believe in white racial supremacy, and they don't even think that they believe they have dominion over everyone else. So they don't believe that even though they say you have a right to be free, it's almost like what they were doing really was setting up a reservation. We call it an asylum, but they were setting up, basically a colony. They were first of all ridding themselves of having these people. So not the agents, but the actual owners, the financiers of this. They were trying to get these people, these freemen, out of America. And the free Africans that were repatriated, that were captured and liberated, and the American-born freemen, most of whom had European ancestry or parentage. Even going far back, as you can see, this is an actual sketch of Cooker. Look at his nose. Clear European features, but he had very African hair. And he was very, very proud, a very proud African. And he said he was going to live there and die there. And that's exactly what happened. He refused to go. He could have gone back to the States. He didn't want to. His whole passion was to be a minister and to spread the word of God, and also to spread literacy. Rightly or wrongly, that was his view. He felt that would help the people that he was working with. And he chose to, you can go to the next slide. One of the reasons he chose to remain in Sierra Leone, because there was already colonies established. They weren't going into a place where people were not used to, these colonies that being set up. So you've already got Paul Coffey, who was born in 1759. I got a little bit about him here. So, he died in 1817. But Coffey was the first American. He was born in the United States. His father was born in Africa. His father's name was Kofi. So we can assume that he was from, what is modern day Ghana. But he called himself Coffey. It's a westernized version or anglicized version of Kofi, as in Kofi Annan and, other Ghanaians named Kofi. So he was born to a free African-born man, and his mother was presumed to have been an American, Indian, like an indigenous American. So he was very successful trader. He was a merchant. He had his own ship. He went and actually met with the president of the United States, James Madison. When he had the idea, he said, look, I'm going to Africa all the time. The British are setting up, they're setting up this colony. I'm doing great. I want to, take some freemen back with me. He wanted to take some freemen back to Africa with him. And so he had to meet with James Madison. I want you guys to think about this. This is a country where human beings are property. But Paul Coffey has the right to go and meet with the president of the United States and be given an audience because he's wealthy and powerful. So it's just very interesting. I want you all to keep thinking about these things as we go through this history, because there's a lot of very wealthy and powerful African people. And he goes and the president of the United States says, you know what, Mr. Coffee? Sure. And I want you to also remember, this is before segregation. So this is before Jim Crow laws. This is before they started to break a lot of systems down. So we have to remember that we have to follow history chronologically. We're talking about before, we're talking about 1812, the year 1812. This is 5 years before his death. He went and met with James Madison, and he took a number of liberated people back. I want you to also know that he did this before the 1819 Act was passed. This is a little bit of so ACS, the US government did not want to get involved with repatriation until it was made legal. Yet, James Madison gave Paul Coffey permission to remove free Black people from the United States. That's always struck me as odd. Why, if you are free, are you not allowed to just leave? Why does there have to be legislation passed?
Right.
And it gets back to this whole thing about dominion. The idea that even though you are free, you're still the possession of the state. You still need, so it's not even just about getting a passport so you can travel. It is about, you need to be allowed to leave. If you were a white American of European descent, what that called themselves white, if you were a European American, you could get up and say, hey, I'm going to go be a missionary in Africa. You wouldn't need special legislation to do this. So this is a theme I want you to really think about as we move forward. So we've got Coffee, our Ashanti man here, probably from the Ashanti Kingdom descendant, half Native American, took a lot of people to Sierra Leone with him on various voyages.
Carl, and I'm thinking about that for a moment now, that Coffee had to go to the president to say, allow me. Was that, and you looking at it like he was seeking permission?
Yes.
Because this was not just one or two persons. This was going to be a large group of people. So there's needed to be some form of arrangement. Don't you see it that way?
Right.
Even with financing, right? Because they needed ships. So you're looking at it as a dominion. So these people, or the freedmen, were almost still being the property of other people. I don't see it that way.
Well, in the greater context, you'll see it that way soon.
Okay.
One of the reasons I also see it that way is because we, in the previous show, we talked about the 1819 revision to the anti-slavery law, which gave permission to remove people. It really doesn't matter what the number is. Right now, 10,000 people, American citizens, can get up and move to Europe. There doesn't need to be a law or permission given for them to do so because they're free to do so. There's never been a case where a law needs to be passed for Americans, free American citizens of European descent, to leave.
Got it.
I mean, we had this thing in Guyana, I think in the 1970s, where a bunch of people went to Belize, I believe it was. There was no law needed for that because you're free. You can go. Being a citizen of a country doesn't mean you're a captive. But I want you to think about that. These people were supposedly free, but you need permission to remove them.
And you didn't need money because it's a wealthy man, so it was not.
No, he financed this himself. He financed this himself. He had his own ship. He financed this himself. And the freedmen that could afford to pay for the voyage, they paid. The ones that could not, he allowed them to go. It was philanthropy.
Yeah.
He's like, look, we're in Africa. We're happy. Come and join us. And you won't have to have someone, you work for your wealth. No one can come and just take it from you because you'll have rights there.
Yeah.
So this is, now we're going to talk about Kizzle. And you said it is pronounced, how was it pronounced? Kizzle?
No, how we pronounce it, we say Kizzle. John
Kizzle. Okay, however
No,
it
we
is.
can go. We can go with Kizzle if that works.
It's like when I hear people say call Hillary Teague. What do they call him? Teague. I mean, they call Hillary Teague. Hillary Teague. I don't know what they call him, but his name is it's pronounced Teague actually. But anyway, it's French. But it's Teague, and I think people call him Tige.
Each, yeah.
Yeah, it's Teague. But from about 1818 to 1820, um, Kissel worked with Samuel Bacon and Samuel Crozer. So Bacon and Crozer were agents of the American Colonization Society, and Kissel, who was basically a liberated uh, African. He was born in Sierra Leone. They believe he was born in Sherbro, and he was taken into slavery when he was very young. He was liberated. He fought in the Revolutionary War. He was taken to Nova Scotia, and then later the British repatriated him to Freetown through the Sierra Leone Company, and then he became very, very successful. He went on and formed his own town, his own city, really, called Kizzleton. And the reason I bring him up is because these people that were on both the Elizabeth, especially those on the Elizabeth that went through that horror, and also they went through much disrespect from the agents. The recaptured Africans wanted to just remain with the people in Sierra Leone. They didn't want to go forward with ACS. So the reason very few people on the Elizabeth, very few of the survivors went forward to what became Liberia is because they had these settlements already established with rules, and there was no white governor. There was no European, American or British governor. It was all African people living in a settlement, answerable to themselves alone. So you had Kizzle, you had coffee, you had, people trading, and there was not much of a separation between the indigenous, the recaptured, and the repatriated descendants of people who were born in Europe and America.
So the ACS had nothing to do with the people in Sierra Leone in terms of controlling them or financing or doing anything whatsoever.
No, of course not. So what they had done was they went to go purchase land from Kizzle, and then they decided they didn't want ACS there. So what ends up happening now, so go to the next slide. I'm going to try to go through this really quickly. I don't want to bore people. So now you are looking at, and this is a map of sovereign Africa before ACS established a colony at Cape Mesurado. So this is the reason I'm showing this map. These little dots represent known kingdoms and things like that. Up here towards the north, you see all of that like on the Sahara Belt. If you're wondering why all these places would be on a map that was drawn in 1795, it's because Africans had been trading across the Sahara for over 1,000 years, really. So these empires up here, from Asawa all the way across to the west coast of Africa, which is near what is now Futa Jalon in Guinea. Everybody was already aware of these places. And it wasn't because of trade with the coastal Europeans, but it's because of trade with Europeans and Asiatic people across the Sahara. So these northern parts, these northwestern parts were already the Fulani Empire of Futa Jalon. These people were already very much aware of Europe. This belt of states going across the top could be considered the southern edge of was once the southern edge of the ancient Roman Empire. So these people have been interacting with Europeans and Asians for thousands of years. And you see where Futa Jalon is. I don't know if you have a pointer or if you can blow up the map a little bit. So Futa Jalon is right. Okay, there's a little square that says Freetown.
Yeah.
Futa Jalon is highlighted in the yellow right there. You see how close the empire of Futa Jalon is to Freetown. That's the Fulani Empire.
Wow.
And a lot of, they used so the Fulani Empire was, and Futa Jalon had not fallen yet. in 1795 or 1820 for that matter. It was still powerful. They were still selling slaves. They were still doing slave raids. Futa Jalon was an empire that was built on enslavement. It's on the slave.
There's an issue with your audio there.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It looks like someone called you.
Probably.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Focus on Liberia. This is the History Channel. We are broadcasting from Atlanta, Georgia. We'll take a break there while I call, get a system set up. If possible, go out and come back in, and we'll be right
At Focus on Liberia, we discuss everything Liberia, from education to politics, arts and culture, entertainment, agriculture, history, religion, family, and technology. Focus on Liberia uncovers and showcases the best of Liberia and shows the world the truth about Liberia. We educate, elevate, and promote all things Liberia. We conduct interviews, panel discussions, debates, and more. Tune in to Focus on Liberia on Facebook and YouTube and be a part of the stories that make up the news.
This is Focus on Liberia, and I am Tanneh-Chewlae.
Welcome back to Focus on Liberia. We are discussing the birth of the African Republic, that's Liberia. This is on the Liberian History Channel with Carl Family. Today's topic is part 3, and we are dealing with law and order, sovereignty, and subjection. Back to you, Carl.
Great. Is the audio a little bit better?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I'm explaining this background because it's important to know the context. So Europeans have very little control. They have a lot of influence over the coast, but very little control at this point in history. The United States of America at this point in history is a very weak country. They don't have a very strong military, and it's also a very young country. They just won their independence from England in 1776. And it is now about 1820. So the United States is a young country, because a lot of people think that it was some kind of world superpower at this time. It was not. It is important to remember what year it was. So yes, the U.S. had the beginnings of a navy. They had, ships. They had some wealth. I mean, for God's sake, they committed genocide and wiped out a whole, continent full of human beings and, acquired the land and other resources. So it's not that they were completely poor, but they were not, and they had slaves. They had people, working for them. So it's a new up and coming country, but it is not as powerful as Britain and France. So this is very important. I mean, the United States is in no way comparable at this point in history to Britain and France. And so you've got Futa Jalon. A lot of times you read these older books and they called everybody Mandingo, and they talk about, they have European features and they look like they're mixed race. Whenever you hear them talking about Mandingos that look like they're mixed race, that have European features, they're talking about these Asiatic Africans from the Futa Jalon Empire. These are the Fulanis of Futa Jalon, because these people were all up and down the coast, even at Cape Mesurado, trading and doing all kinds of things. They had warriors invading at Cape Mountain and doing all kinds of things, causing all kinds of trouble at this point in time. So, but Futa Jalon also fell before Liberia even got its independence. It was eventually overcome by basically Mendi speaking people, Mandingos, Sosos, and others band together and basically captured Futa Jalon and crushed it. But at this point, when these people are arriving, Futa Jalon is still extremely powerful. So the little dot that says Freetown, that is where we're talking about. We're not at Freetown, but the settlement for the ACS is not far from Freetown.
Okay.
All right, so where are we now?
Next slide.
Yes, next slide. So the reason I was showing you the previous slide is I wanted to emphasize that Africa was still Africa. Though there was chaos and there was war and there was, you had these empires that were built on the slave trade, you still had, they were still Africans, sovereign Africans controlling these places. You didn't have some European dictating to them what to do. That's important because people have this perception that people would just pull up with a ship, get off the ship with their guns and go grab people. None of these people had the power to do this at this point in history. That came later. So, and it was a slow process. So when Kizzle had decided, Kizzle and Coffee gave them a hard time, so they couldn't be there. Eli Ayers and Captain Stockton had to go look for, Dr. Ayers and Captain Stockton had to go look for land for them to settle because they were no longer welcome near Kizzleton or near Freetown. They didn't want another Freetown being set up near Freetown. So they went down the coast. They were denied, even at Buchanan. What's now Edina, I think, Trade Town. They tried to set up, they even made negotiations. They denied them. Finally, it was a mulatto by the name of John S. Mill, who decided to finally give them some property. So John S. Mill was the son of an Englishman and a Day native woman. And he was born at Cape Mesurado, but he went to school in Liverpool and returned to Cape Mesurado and continued his father's business. His father had what was called at that time a factory, which is basically a business center where he would trade in human beings and other goods from the interior. So the slaves would carry coffee, rice, other things, goods to the coast, and the goods would be sold together. And John S. Mill, when he finished school in England, he went back to Cape Mesurado where he was continuing this business. There were many other factories along the coast. Boatswain was operating on the coast. And boatswain, what most people believe was brought to Cape Mesurado by John S. Mill's father. Because boatswain at that time, and this is very interesting, he actually took the British flag to as far north up the St. Paul River as modern day Boku. So the British flag used to wave. The British flag was implanted there before, and they used boatswain to do so before the first American ACS person or government agent was even there to negotiate for land. This is important. Because that happened in 1819 and now, or 1817, I'm sorry, now it's 1820. So John S. Mills tells them, hey, my father left me Providence Island. There's some houses there already. You all can use Providence Island. And I can gather up some natives, some day boys, and they'll build more houses for you. And that was the first place that they set up was at Providence Island. It was John S. Mills that allowed them to do so. And this is before they signed a treaty to get more land, of course, because that Providence Island was not going to be able to hold everyone.
How was John S. Mills? And it's interesting, right? Because we're talking prior to 1822. We have someone who is educated in Liverpool, in the UK, living at Cape Mesurado.
Long before him even. Remember in the last episode we talked about Peter? King Peter, who signed a treaty, his father was educated at Cape Mesurado. At Liverpool.
Right. So was John Mills acting on behalf of the indigenous, or was he in what capacity was he given this land?
John S. Mill lived at Cape Mesurado for two reasons. One, that's where he was born. He spoke Day. And the second reason is because his father, who also lived there and sold slaves and spoke Day, his white British father, he was basically carrying on this business.
Okay.
And so being educated in Liverpool, learning how to read and write, it gave you, this was a normal thing for these people. There were a lot of Africans educated at Liverpool. And so he knew he was African. And this is why he knew he wasn't his father. And it's interesting because John S. Mill, I mean, you were who your mother was. So he was they. And I'm sure all of his descendants probably don't even know that they're descendant from a mulatto.
Yeah.
But he has descendants in Liberia. And many mulattoes have descendants in Liberia. But how many, we have this joke, how many generations does it take to erase European blood? It's really only 2. You have one child with a European father and an African mother, and that child marries an African, and they have one child. That next generation looks like everybody else.
Yeah.
So it's very easy to erase it. I mean, within 2 generations, and then once in a while you have some recessive trait pop up that's a European trait, and you say, oh, what's going on here? So, genetic disorders and things that are specific to Europe showing up in coastal populations all along Africa that are, going back hundreds of years when they had an ancestor that was, settled on the coast.
And not to go in different direction, you mentioned boatswain.
Yes.
Who planted the British flag as far as modern day Bopolo.
Yes.
And from what I've seen on the internet, is boatswain is different from Sao Boso. Is that true?
I don't believe they're the same person. I think the person they call Sao Boso, I think he lived later. And I haven't been able to see any evidence that they're the same person. The oral traditions of Sao Boso are so completely different from the written record of boatswain that there's no, and I would love to know from any, one who believes that they were the same person, why they believe that, other than the fact that it's just been repeated for so long. But, people who were alive in the 1960s would say, oh, yes, I used to work for Sao Boso. There was an older lady, and I'm like, she cannot be 200 years old. One of the challenges with our oral tradition is that in our oral tradition, there's no real dates. They don't give dates, really. Yeah. And so people get dates confused. I had a conversation with a good friend of mine who thought Lot Carey Mission was created by Lot Carey himself. Lot Carey did have a Baptist mission, but Lot Carey died, almost 85 years before Lot Carey Mission was built by the Baptists. So the conflict about the land that Lot Carey Mission acquired, the oral tradition in Bomi attributes that to Lot Carey himself, who had been dead for 85 years. So if you talk to the average person, like, oh, Lot Carey is a bad guy. He came and took our land and was forcing our children to go to the Christian school. No, that was not Lot Carey. The school was called Lot Carey. So you see that the disconnect from the oral tradition. Right. It is because there's no dates.
So going back to boatswain and Sao Boso, could they be of the same ethnic group? Maybe, is that why?
So according to the written record, boatswain spoke English. He had been to England. He worked on a ship. Right. He worked on a ship, a British merchant ship. They say merchant ship. It was probably a slave ship. And he spoke English. And then after he stopped working on the ship as a boatswain, which is why he called himself boatswain, he then set up his own slave raiding operation, where he would basically, he was acting on behalf of the British dealers, the British merchants, in helping to subdue. They would supply him with weapons. He organized an army and basically, was engaged in raiding slaves. And he said what he told the ACS agents. He told Eli Ayers in Stockton that he was Balaam, and that he was from Shabar. And so, that's the Balaam people are not Mende people. The Balaam people are not Mende speaking people. The Balaam people it's a Mel group. So that's, so that's his own words and what he said, and what primary sources that met him and talked to him. That's what he said. And there's a lot of quotes there where he's speaking English. I'll give you bullock. He gave them cows. He spoke English. I don't know. There's no record of whether or not he was literate, but John S. Mills certainly was. And I have very strong reason to believe that King Peter was also literate because his father went to school in England. And that's well documented.
And which of them wrote that, having sold your country and accepted payments, you must take the consequences and let the Americans have their land immediately? Was that Boswell or Sal?
That was, so there's no mention of Sal Boso in any written document until the 20th century.
Okay.
Nobody ever, I've never seen Sal Boso written anywhere until the 20th century. I've never seen Zolu Duma written anywhere until the 20th century. I think what happened in the 20th century is that in the mid 20th century, especially during the Tubman era, Tubman wanted to give indigenous names to people who did not use indigenous names. That's what I believe, because nobody wrote any, I mean, there's so many different people that could read and write. I mean, all of our presidents were literate. There were a lot of literate people in Liberia, and they wrote the native names of people who had native names.
Right.
You know, so, you know, if the man's name was Sal Boso, they would have written Sal Boso. You know, why is it Sal Boso is easier to write than many of the other names? There were other Mandingo people, kings, whose names they wrote down and interacted with and took manuscripts. There were other Fulani people whose names are written down, Bassa people whose names are written down. There were, you know, numerous, you know, kings whose names are written down. You know, but these names, Zolu Duma, shows up later through the Gola folklore. Same thing with Sal Boso.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry for going in that direction, but we needed to get that clarification. Back to John Mills. And
so John S. Mills, very interesting. I already said he had an English father. His mother was Day. Let me see. His father basically had a slave ship, and he acquired a bunch of property near Cape Mesurado. And he was when John S. Mills went to school, because England, while at this time they have liberated their slaves, you're a mulatto person, you're not going to have the same power of self-determination. You're always going to be a second-class citizen. You're not going to have the same power of self-determination as your father. I mean, his father's a trashy slave dealer, so he's not going to be part of high society or anything. So even though they have money, they're not respected because of the industry they're in.
Yeah.
So he goes back to Cape Mesurado. He sets up shop. He ended up helping Ayers and Stockton negotiate for the acquisition of additional territory. This is important, because people have this idea that these guys just came and drew guns on people and just took land. That's not what happened. There's only one account of that I've read anywhere. And the account is written almost, 60 years later. And it sounds so like dramatic. And it reminds me of this picture they like to paint of the lone cowboy in the wild, wild west, in the United States, that one guy kills 500 Indians, and that story that was written, decades after the event is the only story that talks about him pulling a gun on anyone. There's only one source for this. Everything else is consistent, which is that they went in there and they negotiated. But the problem is, we'll get into that soon. I don't think that they paid the correct amount for the land, because they were given $10,000 at that time. It's a lot of money in 1820 to acquire property and to help settle these people. But the value of the goods that they gave in exchange for the land that was negotiated was absolutely ridiculous.
Right.
Though it was common for that to occur, in the context of the US government giving so much money and so many resources for this process, and they didn't, it's like, what happened to the money? Ayers and Stockton, what did you do with the money? And they did not take a single African American immigrant with them to negotiate for this land.
Right.
This is the ultimate disrespect. They went to Sierra Leone. They negotiated with Coffee and Kizzle, and they negotiated with Freeman in Sierra Leone for land. And now they have the immigrants at Sierra Leone. They leave the immigrants there as if they were children. You had brilliant minds like, Hillary Teague. You had brilliant minds at Cape Mesurado. I'm sorry, at Sherbro. I mean, in Sierra Leone, in the Sierra Leone territory. They left them there. And these guys went forward to go negotiate. Finally, they get this land. We can go to the next slide. And
just to add on that, the land they got, there's accounts where King Peter brought back those things. They say, hey, here are the things
we're going to get into that. Exactly. We're going to get into that.
All right.
So this is the contract. This is the contract. And we got to give props to Dr. Burroughs for this, because he's the one. I mean, this was published all over the place. But this, Dr. Burroughs says this is the original document. But this information in this very format has been published for quite a long time. So basically what this document is the contract between the sovereign Africans, and John S. Mill acts as a witness, not as a person selling, because the treaty he gave them for Providence Islands, that was just between him and them, and everyone recognized Providence Island as John S. Mill's property. So no one ever disputed Providence Island. But it wasn't enough land. So he took them to the Lord of Cape Mesurado, which was King Peter. And King Peter is a descendant of many King Peters who have always been lords of Cape Mesurado.
Okay.
So this day king, who called himself Peter, probably, we talked about Peter Pana and all the other Peters, the first video.
Yeah.
The King Peter, as they call him now, we refer to him as Zolu Duma, who I believe might have been his descendant, but let's just leave that one alone. You got to research that and figure that out, because there's a lot of I don't think they're the same person. But anyway, so King Peter, he gets up, says, okay, you know what, I can help you guys out. I can give you guys some land. They all get together to buy this land. Here's the problem. King Peter had already ceded land to other Europeans along in the vicinity. You also had, not too far away at Cape Mount, at what's called Robertsport, and also Bytown in Mesurado. You have Bytown, and then from Bytown you've got a huge factory at Robertsport, slave dealing factory, where ships come to pick up human beings. You have the same thing at Galenas, which is at the mouth of the Mono River, which is now it's in Sierra Leone, which is just past Cape Mount. And in the other direction, you've got Trade Town. You've got which is massive, slave trade at the mouth of the St. John River, which I think is now Edina. You have all of these networks of slave traders right along the coast. And you've got Europeans permanently stationed at Cape Mount, at Robertsport, and at Trade Town. I want you to just think about this. Now you have these abolitionists setting up shop. And here is Peter saying to them, yeah, you guys come on out. What do you got for me? I'll bring some of my boys. We'll all sit down. We're going to share this whatever they're giving us, and we'll give these guys some swampy land here. We'll get all these goods, and we'll be happy. Well, he didn't factor in that these people were going to try to set up something like a free town. Mm. And remember when I told you that they went to Trade Town first, and the people at Trade Town drove them away. mainly because it was the Europeans. They're like, hey, you guys can't do this. They already shut us down. We can't go past Galenas because the British are over there with their Freetown business and their slavery-free abolitionist zone. They want to put a slavery-free abolitionist zone at Cape Mesurado. They're going to destroy our business.
Yeah.
The reason this is important is because a lot of times we think of them coming in and taking land that was occupied or taking the whole country that was occupied. This is a little bit complicated. I don't believe, one, that they gave a fair amount for the land. But the evidence I'm looking at also doesn't suggest that they were angry about land as much as they were angry about what the settlement was representing and what they were trying to do. The conflict doesn't seem to have been about land at all because they had other Europeans settled in the vicinity, living there, that they ceded land to. Especially Robertsport, which we know that there was a trade deal at Robertsport, and where they ceded land. Even Captain Cano, the infamous slave dealer, had land ceded to him at Robertsport. And then also Tradetown, where you have another situation. We have a factory that's got Europeans living and doing their evil business of selling and trading in human beings. So it was normalized in that area, and they did not like what was happening at Freetown. Freetown was bringing a lot of activity, and then because Freetown was right there, these British ships are coming off the coast, and if they catch you with human cargo, they're going to seize your ship, and they're going to take all of your captives, and they're going to release them at Freetown. Can you snap back 2 shots? I want to show them this Oyo Empire.
Okay.
To the map of Africa. If you can go backwards. Okay. I don't know how well people can see this if you can blow it up. So you've got the Oyo Empire near where's right now Nigeria. So these people are having war with the Dahomey Empire. Oyo hasn't fallen yet, but this is where these Ebo people are coming from in later years when we talk about this. So there's a lot of conflict going on. There's the whole Congo Basin, which is, basically from, I would say from Togo all the way to roughly just before you get to Angola, that whole arch there, that whole Congo Basin. That whole area, you've got a lot of wars and human cargo, all kinds of things going on. You also have the same thing along Liberia and Sierra Leone. At this point, the Ghana Elmina Castle has been shut down because the British have now shut down Elmina Castle. So most of these smaller factories along the coast of Liberia and Sierra Leone, that's where people are doing transshipment of human beings. They take vessels in, they grab people, and then they carry them, and then, to Galenas. They wait at Galenas. When they get enough human beings to put in a ship and carry across to Brazil or Cuba or wherever they were carrying them, that's what they would do. They couldn't, and also tried to illegally take them to the United States as well. So I just want to do that. Let's go forward a little bit. Do you have any questions before I move on?
That's good.
Okay, so the treaty is important because and I don't know how much of it you can actually see.
No,
it's so small.
Yeah.
Unless you have a computer in front of you. But basically, they sold the land, and I'll just read you. So basically, what they did was they said let me back up. I don't want to read this whole thing, but what I want to first do before I read you this quote: these men who were signatories to this document, they were not simple-minded people. These were not what's the word I'm looking for? I'm trying to be diplomatic here. We have been made to believe that these people, these sovereign Africans, were naive and childlike and didn't know what was going on. This is one of the greatest myths of Liberian history, that we were some kind of noble savages. This perception is the product of racism, purely dehumanization, because there's nothing that in this world as a noble, we were not noble savages. We were not like these little tribes and bands in the rainforest in Brazil that had never seen other human beings before. But that's the picture they paint of us. And it is false. When we were looking at the map, I was letting everyone know, let's see, look how close these empires of Futa, Jala, and all these places were. So you talking about West Africa here, we're not talking about some remote area in the Amazon rainforest where people haven't seen other human beings for 10,000 years. Yet people somehow believe that these people that had been trading, especially at Cape Mesurado, not only in human beings, but in ivory and many other resources, massive agricultural trading was going on. They want people to believe that they didn't understand what was happening. That is not true. There's no way that's possible. And the reason I don't believe that's possible is because in the first place, some of them could speak English. We know at least 2 of them could read because they were educated. And the way the document is written, the treaty was between these people. If you are going to overpower people and take their land, you don't need their signature or their permission. You don't need to have a contract with someone that you don't see as sovereign. Nobody signs a contract with a slave. The fact that the contract existed is testament to the sovereignty of the people who signed it. When these same people, the same European culture, when they conquered other people, including the people of North America that were, one of in fact, the greatest genocide that happened in human history, they did not need their permission for the land.
Well, Carl, America did not want to be seen that way as conquering people or colonizing people. So they could put a fake document together to make it look like they were signing actual agreement with the people.
Why wouldn't they have done that with the Native American tribes? Why wouldn't they have done that with Hawaii? Why wouldn't they have done that with all the other places they conquered?
Because they were now a country now, right? At this point.
But when they became a country, they were a country when they conquered the whole western half of this place. There was only 13 colonies when they got independent. They killed these Indians after Liberia was established. During and mostly after. Most of the genocide that occurred in the United States toward the Indians happened after the United States became independent. Then they moved west. So the genocide against Native Americans is occurring simultaneously with this, and it continued even afterwards. And that's why I said the timeline of history is important. Most of that push westward came with European immigration and all of those things that happened much later than this. A lot of the people that are European Americans we see, their ancestors came to the United States, many of them, in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So they needed places for them to go. They pushed westward. That's how the West, you ever hear how the West was won. So that process of exterminating Native Americans, they were not signing treaties with them. The other thing is, this treaty isn't signed by the United States. It's signed by the 2 agents, Eli Ayers and Stockton. So you've got Captain Robert F. Stockton's signature. You've got Eli Ayers, MD. He was a doctor, a medical doctor. Those 2 sign it. The sovereign Africans sign. And they're signing on behalf of the American Colonization Society, which is owned, incorporated, and operated by private citizens.
And these guys were reporting to Congress, right? Because at some point, they go to Congress for hearing.
Yes, they had to basically, because there were two things happening. The U.S. Congress, after the 1819 law was passed, their concern was mainly the recaptured Africans, that the people that were rescuing and sending back. And they wanted reports on what was going on. And also, there was a lot of economic activity around there. They wanted to make sure that, they understood what their citizens were doing over there.
And for these sovereign Africans, I see X's to their name. Like if they were educated, or if some of them were educated, why weren't they writing their names instead of just marking X? I don't know if I'm seeing that clearly.
Yeah, so it looks like they're signed. One of the things that, and I have to talk to, I haven't, this document, I have to talk to Dr. Burroughs about this, because the handwriting, it looks like it's signed. So I'm not a document expert. I just put it up there because he found it. But most of the time when you read this, it's in print. It's a reprint of exactly what's written here. And so you see their names. It says his X mark. Okay, John S. Mills, it does say signed. It doesn't have his X mark.
Yeah.
Let me see. I'm going to look for King Peter. King Peter, it says signed. So there's the two people who I, based on the records, were educated, they signed.
So there's a
So King Peter, but King George did not sign. King Jimmy, King Governor, King Long Peter, King Zoda. They didn't, those guys all wrote X's.
Yeah.
Even if they couldn't read, they had interpreters there. John S. Mill was there. He understood English, and a lot of them understood some degree of broken English. I know that King Peter certainly did. And then there's quotes in broken English from Boatswain and others, later on. Boatswain wasn't present at this deal. That's another misconception. He comes in later to try to defend the colony. So where are we? Do you have any more questions about this? So there is a lot of controversy around this document. Yeah. From what I've looked at, I believe that they made this treaty, and there's two reasons why. There are multiple examples of treaties being signed in the area with people. I mean, there were other people there that these cessation treaties were made with. The British made these treaties in Sierra Leone. John Kissel made the same type of treaty with even though he's an African, westernized African, he made these treaties with the indigenous people. Paul Coffey made such treaties with indigenous people. The kings at Robertsport in what is now Grand Cape Mount, they had numerous treaties going further back. Cape Masquerado had treaties, land treaties and arrangements going back, a couple of centuries, because the Dutch had once settled there. I've been given a settlement there just before. So this thing of having strangers come and set up shop in the vicinity is not strange.
Yeah. Is it possible, do you have any written text to just quote the main point in this treaty?
Oh yeah, that's what I was trying to do. Sorry. So I wanted to give the background.
Right.
So let me see what is a good part. Let me take this. We, the kings, princes, and headmen, for a proper consideration by us received, do further agree to build for, okay, so what they're doing here, they're trying to build for the use of said citizens of America 6 large houses on any place selected by them within the above described tract of ceded land. So not only did they agree in writing to, or on this contract, to give them the land, they also agreed to build them 6 large houses to house the people that are going to be transferring from Sherbrooke.
Slave labor still continuing.
So they agreed to do it. So it's not the kings themselves who are going to build the houses. They're going to get laborers to build the houses.
Right.
But I want you to, they said, in proper consideration by us received. That's, old 19th century English for basically saying we've been paid for this service.
Yeah.
In proper consideration by us received, do further agree to build. So they're basically saying we've received already the compensation to build these houses. That's what they're saying.
Right. Is this compensation mentioned as to?
Yeah, it is. I mean, that's what I was saying when we were talking about the money. I mean, they're talking about, okay, so they got 6 muskets,
Yeah.
1 box of beads,
Glasses, handkerchiefs.
beads. Oh, I thought we made beads. 2 hogshead tobacco. So they had 2, tins of tobacco. 1 cask of gunpowder. I want you to think about this for a minute. We act like these. Why would they need gunpowder if they were just naked savages that didn't know anything? You need gunpowder because you have muskets, because you have guns.
Yeah.
You don't get gunpowder, to what are you gonna do with it? So they got 6 iron bars. And let me tell you something, these guys were the people were reverse engineering weapons. So if you got 6 bars of iron, they gave them 6 bars of iron, 10 iron pots. So the 6 bars of iron, what are they going to do? They're going to melt that down because this iron has already been refined. We were making iron. We had iron smelting, in the northern part of the Liberian territory, and we were reverse engineering muskets in the northern part of the Liberian territory. Many of the Mandingo, the Loma, the Mende people in the north were reverse engineering these muskets. So they were making their own guns back then. What they didn't make was their own gunpowder. So gunpowder was extremely valuable. So they gave them a cask of gunpowder, 6 iron bars, 10 iron pots, 1 dozen knives and forks, 1 dozen spoons, 6 pieces of blue bafta, 4 hats. Our chiefs like bluffing in these European hats. Look at some of the earliest pictures and sketches coming out of Liberia. You see these chiefs wearing, with these beautiful indigo gowns, but then they got these funny little European hats on their heads, especially our coastal rulers around Maryland and those areas. Even in the northern part, they would take these hats and trade them to chiefs in the Northern Territory, and it was very, very valuable to them. They had a box of pipes, 3 pairs of shoes. Shoes were extremely valuable back then. Right. Most people were barefoot. They didn't have sandals. I mean, it's just crazy. 1 keg of nails, 20 looking glasses, 3 pieces of handkerchiefs. Yeah. Handkerchiefs. So I don't like reading this because it boils my blood, because I know how much money they were given to acquire this land. And for me, it's like they set up this colony for failure.
Right. And 3 handkerchiefs for how many people?
I mean, they give these stuff, right? So it's not that everybody's going to get a handkerchief, but they're going to divide this stuff among themselves.
The elite.
The people who sat there and signed this treaty, it was for them. They're getting paid for it. And they're going to go back and they're going to take their subjugated people and make them build these houses that they got paid for.
Yeah.
Because that's what our people do.
Fast forward to today, you still have a whole county receiving $200,000 for county development fund, but that's a different story. Let's go ahead.
How much? Okay, so let's go to the next one. All right.
Yehudi Ashman.
No, this is Lock Carey. Ashman is a European. So this is Lock Carey. And oh my God, I see why you said Ashman, because I have the wrong thing there. I'm so sorry. This is Lock Carey. Forgive me. So that's the wrong one. But here, give me 1 second here. You can go to the next slide because that one's completely wrong.
All right, Lock Carey.
Yeah. So that was supposed to be about, well, let's go back. Just ignore the picture.
Yeah, you switched
So 1822, so they acquired the land. And in 1822, so once they acquired land, they went back to Sherbrooke. The U.S. ship Alligator went to Cherbourg. It was a naval ship. It just picked the people up, the people from both the Elizabeth and the Nautilus, who were willing to go on to help ACS set up this colony, boarded the Alligator, is the name of the vessel, and the Alligator took them from Sierra Leone to Cape Mesurado. And a few months later, Hootie Ashman arrives in 1822 with 15 recaptured Africans and I think 35 African-American freemen. And Hootie Ashman is given charge. He is now the head of the colony, because remember, the previous ACS agents died in Cherbourg. They died in Sierra Leone. They got sick and they perished. So they had to replace them. So Ashman comes as a replacement. But in February of 1828, Ashman got sick. And I want you to know something. Between 1822 and 1828, and we're going to have a separate show about the wars. We're going to talk about those in detail. But you've got two things happening. One, they get angry with King Peter because he's brought this wrath upon the land. He's brought these funny looking, Africans in their Western clothes, speaking, things about abolition. This time period, people are literally able to stand at Ducourt and see slave ships or see crew canoes taking enslaved people out to sea, to these bigger ships. They're able to see this. And so you've got these abolitionists like Locke Carey, these people that are very much against slavery because they know what it is. They know the other end of it. They're trying to stamp this out. And this is the same thing that happened in Freetown, and the whole coast is aware. So what do? They start to incite the people against them. If you allow these people to settle here, they're going to stop your way of life. If you allow these people to settle here, they're going to take your power away from you. You're not going to be powerful anymore.
And that power and then the way of life, that's with dealing in slaves.
Not only dealing in slaves. Not only dealing in slaves.
What else?
They were also trading. They were doing many, many things. Slavery was the concern of the Europeans who were inciting them more than it was of the Africans, because they were trading in other things.
Yeah,
but the people who were powerful, unfortunately, were powerful because they had shifted their specific focus to exploiting this process and inciting wars. The people on the coast were quite different at this point. You have, a lot of crewmen that are voluntarily transporting human beings in the canoes to the slave ships. So it was a whole industry. They're like, but wait, if you stop this, how are we going to get paid? You're going to take our jobs away from us.
Of course, that's understandable.
Yeah, so, and you don't want, when I look at these things.
Carl, we having problem with that audio again.
Why is this happening? Very strange.
Yeah.
Okay, so is it better now?
No.
Okay, I'll go out and come back.
All right. Just go back.
Hi, my name is Addie Tyler from Pennsylvania, and you're watching Focus on Liberia.
Welcome back to Focus on Liberia. This is the Liberian History Channel. My guest here is Carl Famulé. She is FOL Public Policy Analyst, and we're discussing Liberian history. Our topic today is part 3 of the birth of the African Republic. We are discussing law, order, sovereignty, and subjection. Let's go back to the PowerPoint, Carl.
All right. So basically, they're in a situation where they're being attacked. because there's incitement going on. You also immediately upon the arrival of the alligator with Lot Carey and Elijah Johnson, all of these people, they immediately get to work to start a school, to start teaching, to start trying to incorporate the children of the natives. So you have a settlement in the middle of a lot of hustle and bustle. So Lot Carey's going out and ministering to people, trying to get students. The situation is tense because you also have people plotting war to destroy the settlement. Ashman, right at a critical time, when the settlers were vulnerable, outnumbered, outarmed by their neighbors. They had a couple of cannons, but really they were depending on Ashman and his authority as a non-African to work with the British to, what's the best way to put this? I'm trying to be diplomatic in my language here because sometimes it can be a little dramatic. To work with the British to basically protect them. Ashman literally abandons the colony. The same thing kind of happened when, in Sierra Leone, Coker had to take over the colony because the agent died, and he's a mulatto guy, the mixed race guy that I showed you earlier. In this case, when Ashman leaves, he tells Lot Carey, "You're in charge. I'm out of here." He didn't want to get killed by a bunch of natives, so he left. Said he took sick. A lot of the colonists were sick too, right? And his predecessor at Sierra Leone got sick, but he stayed on duty. He did not abandon duty. He stayed on duty, and unfortunately, he died. But Ashman left them there to die.
And this is the guy we named Ashmore Street after?
Yes. Left them there basically to get slaughtered. And, as history would have it, a lot of them did get slaughtered, but they were survivors. The British ended up coming to help them. And, they told them, hey, we'll keep a ship here permanently. Because remember, when Ashman landed, first thing he did was raise that American flag. So he abandons the colony. The colony's there under this U.S. flag, but they have no protection. And they are not able to fight the Dey. The Dey have now, they gave the Dey people gunpowder. They had weapons. They're properly armed. And then you've got the slave dealers are like, here, you can use this cannon against these people. So they're heavily armed, and they plan this ambush against the colonists.
And by colonists, you mean both the repatriated Africans, the African Americans, and the ACS agent. By this time, there's
no ACS. They basically abandoned the immigrants, Black and mulatto immigrants. They abandoned. When Ashman left, that was it. They were on their own.
And now they were being attacked by the Dey people.
They're being attacked by the Dey who were incited by the likes of these traders, these European traders. And again, the idea that they were fighting for land, the land that they built these houses on was not previously occupied. So it wasn't that it's like they took people's farmland or took people's homes. It's that they were setting up another Freetown-like abolitionist, slavery-free zone on the coast.
Right.
And trying to change the whole economic composition. The reason they were using Freetown as a battle cry is because the people who were previously operating in those areas, they were shut down and displaced because they were no longer allowed to operate. So these guys, some of them moved further down the coast. They said, hey, we're not going to have this happen again. So Lot Carey is in charge. He died tragically because There was an explosion in the storage hall where they kept the ammunition and things like that. There was an explosion and he died. But he died in 1828 in November. But in September, right before his death, there was another ship that came called the Antelope, and that had all recaptured Africans on it. It was a ship mostly full of Ebo people from the Dahomey area. And he went and took these recaptured Africans, and they settled on Stockton Creek at a place called Halfway Farms. And he set up a Baptist mission school for Native children there. So he was there to minister to the recaptured Africans. Lott Carey took these captives under his wing, wanted to make sure that they learned how to speak English, became acculturated, baptized them. He wanted them to be Christian. And then there were a lot of, other people in the area, and he was trying to set up this school, trying to negotiate with different people to bring their children so they could learn how to read, and so that he could save them, baptize them. And then he tragically died a couple of months later because they were being attacked and they were trying to get ammunition to go fight back, and there was a huge explosion, and Lott Carey was a casualty of that.
I think if people would dig a little more, maybe he was assassinated. It's very possible, maybe a friendly fire or something, but that's not.
It's documented that they were in the storehouse and there was an explosion.
Yeah.
We can speculate, but that's what's documented. And there's really, there's some things that are documented that we can prove are false because there's other written evidence that contradicts it. In this case, I haven't seen anything. Maybe other people have, and we can keep looking. I don't have any reason to believe that he didn't die accidentally. I mean, at this point, these guys are alone with these recaptured Africans, and immigrants and African Americans and the native people who were already living among them. Because some of the native people wanted to live with them and wanted to, learn, their way of life. So there's already some assimilation going on. There's other people joining, some of the guys who came to build the houses and, under their direction and instruction, telling them how to do it. They said, hey, they wanted to stay with them. They didn't want to go back, to the way that they were. So
is there any documented history that there were some natives who fought alongside the colony?
Of course, yes. Some of the native boys that were there working to help build the houses that remained with them, a couple of them even died trying to defend the colony. So, the Hillary T. slide, I mean, that should have been, it's out of place. But I want to, so what happens after Lott Carey died is the British came and finally to the rescue. And they offered to put up a permanent settlement, said, okay, and Elijah Johnson, they offered to put up this permanent settlement, or like a surveillance, not settlement, kind of like a protection, like what they're doing in Sierra Leone. The British said, hey, the Americans have abandoned you. We can help you, but we need to put the British flag up here. Put the British flag up. Anything that happens here, they're attacking England, and we will be able to defend you. And Elijah Johnson said, no, we're not going to put up any flag that's going to cost us more to take it down. And he rejected the flag and the British flag. And that's where some of, these guys were they had so much respect for themselves. They're alone on a continent. They've got a lot of pressure against them. The British come in and say, hey, we'll help you. You'll be just like Sierra Leone. I mean, just like Freetown. We'll make sure we have, a ship off the coast here. Anything happen, we'll come in. We'll have your base. I'm paraphrasing clearly. We'll have your back. And they said, no, we don't want this flag up. We don't want to put up a flag that's going to cost us more to take it down.
But they were okay with the U.S. flag, not the British flag.
They didn't raise the U.S. flag. Ashman raised the U.S. flag.
Okay.
And the words that he used, Elijah Johnson used, the arrogance of that, the audacity of an African man, Elijah Johnson, African-American man, asserting himself in that way to the British Navy is powerful at that period of time. you have to remember what was happening in the world. Human beings were property. And this man's telling these British, and then he's being attacked by, warriors. And he's saying, we will stand here, we're going to fight. And they refused to leave. It was Boatswain who eventually came in and calmed the situation down.
What did he do?
He basically threatened them that they should leave the colonists alone. Oh, I skipped over a huge part. So you already said it though, but King Peter was told that, hey, you got to go give these people their money back, give them their goods back, get them out of here. And King Peter later on suffered greatly for this sale. He was then attacked and his people decimated, and he and the remnant survivors of his clan went and were incorporated in the colony. He sought refuge in the colony with the remnants of his clan. So they ended up attacking King Peter and killing people, selling the rest of his people off into slavery. And the few surviving members of the clan and himself were then later incorporated into the colony.
And why they did that? Were they being influenced by slave dealers as well, or they were just not too happy with the slave?
It was all the same conflict. It was all the same conflict. King Peter, King Peter led the group of people who signed the land concession, really.
And he was forced to give them back because the people forced him.
Yes. Well, they couldn't give it back, right? So he couldn't give it back. And so they decided to fight him. They attacked him and his clan and wiped out a lot of them, sold a lot of them off into slavery. And they tried to hunt this guy down. And this was right after Boatswain's death. So Boatswain protected these guys until he died. When Boatswain died, that's when all heck broke loose.
And that famous Boatswain speech.
Yeah.
Letter.
So
I had to memorize that in school, Carl.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so skip over this one. This is just part of the ship manifest that shows Hillary Teague and his people on the Elizabeth, kind of where they came from. If they could read, they were freeborn, they could write. This slide is so small. Is there any way for you to make it bigger? No?
No.
Okay, so this basically is a survey of a census. I'm sorry, not a survey, a census of the population before independence, before Liberia became a country.
Right.
And the number of children 5 years and under. Okay, between the ages of 5 and 10. They didn't count babies, I guess, infants. So if you're children between the age of 5 and 10, there were 137. Children 10 years, between 10 and 15 years old, 254. Children under 21, between 15 and 21, 171 of them. All right, and children in their first rudiments, one second here. That's about 255 children who could read and write. About 240 children had been, made literate. And these children, well, I'll get to it. So children that commenced the elements, about 67. Children born of American parents. Total children born of American parents, 370.
Right.
So
of all, 192.
Mm-hmm. Children born of African parents, 192. So for all of us who have been lied to about there being some segregation or even apartheid, you've got African children in the colony before independence that are Liberians. And then this is just a list of children I'm going through. The other one is a list of adults, but this is...
Let me just mention from what I'm reading here, number of American male children, 161. Number of American female children, 207. Number of African male children, 141. Number of African female children, 61 or 51.
51.
And then the total number of children attending school, 662.
Yep.
That's a good number.
So we will say, oh, they never educated us, and never did this, and never did that. And I want you to also know that the children at this, the children being educated, they are mostly boys, as you can see, because it says the number of females is clearly less than the number of males.
Way less.
So what ends up happening is these men end up taking Native girls as wives, because there's not enough educated women, right? So you end up, they end up marrying indigenous women right away, right? Because if you need a wife, there's this beautiful Vi girl, I'm gonna just ask her parents how much is her dowry. So the intermarriage began right away. Even between the recaptured Africans and the African Americans, they were intermarrying almost right away. That's important because we've been, for some reason, there's this idea that didn't happen. So now we can talk a little bit about the laws. What time is it? I think we spent a lot of time talking about these details.
Right. No, it's what the others on the left there is their denomination, their location, description of buildings.
Yeah.
And then you divided them into Americans, recaptured Africans, converted, heathen. And
yeah. Heathens. We're heathen. You know how they say, you heathen child. That's us. Right. We're the heathen children. What is
important here too is their location. You have people in Monrovia, New Georgia, Lower Caldwell, Millsburg, Upper Caldwell, Headington, Robertsville, Marshall, Edina, Bassar Cove, Baxley, and surprisingly Greenville.
Yes.
It extended up to Greenville that time.
So this particular chart that you're the one that's that you're reading off of, this is from 1840. So this is 20 years in. And remember all those numbers of ships we were reading that just kept coming, and some of them were, you know, the Mississippi Colonization Society. They had all these different colonization societies. By 1840, with the exception of Maryland, they had all merged.
Yeah.
So they were independent, but they had kind of merged. So they were kind of like a you know, under an umbrella. So this is all pre-independence. Maryland, at this point in history, has asserted itself as a republic, as a country, as a free state. They call themselves the Free State of Maryland. And I think that's what we'll talk about next time, because right now, it's 9 o'clock.
Right now, let me bring in a few of our comments.
Okay.
And Bobby says he's watching from Grand Crew County. So Bobby, if you're watching from
there, awake, Bobby Thomas. Okay.
Good. Priscilla doesn't want me to read her comment, but I'll do that anyway. Hello, family. Thanks, Cole, as always, for being generous with your time and knowledge to teach, sister. She continued. Thanks, Dennis, for creating the platform that has been, you know, and continue to be used to educate. Please do not read my comment out loud. It's just, I'm sorry, I'm not going to respect that.
That's funny.
Ever said, thank Mr. Jai and Mrs. Carl for your continual commitment, educating and highlighting us on rarely discussed Liberian history. Evis has a question, right? He said, how does you feel about the law that only allows people of Negro descent to be Liberian citizen?
It's absolutely necessary. Liberia is still necessary.
Okay. Yanni Sanse called the U.S. is partly responsible for the failure of Liberia and even the chasm between the settlers and the natives. I wish the U.S. had said this, what Ambassador is saying today in 1847. Oh. Dave just said knowledge has to be contextualized through the people's experiences, their cultures, and value system. Prior to the coming of the Europeans, we had a way we perceive knowledge. We need a paradigm shift. Mohammed Salia Douglas, non-consultation was the order of the day. No wonder the settlers repeated the same behaviors in Liberia. Emmanuel Jesse, Africa can emerge progressive with weaponization policies on the table. Without the guns, the imperialists and slavers will undermine African economic and political freedom. Without weapons, no country can survive without being forced into submission by the imperialists.
This is a fact.
All right, this one, a long one from Mohammed. I think the idea that Botswana is different from South Boso is a reasonable position. South Boso might have come later on because of practical evidence currently existing in the land. The confusing part is when you read accounts from Anderson regarding his experiences in Bopulu. It makes it hard to think that Botswana was the one in charge at the time, if not South Boso. The question is, what was the time difference between the death of Botswana and the time Anderson visited Bopulu?
About, off the top of my head, it's more than 50 years. Anderson went in, 1867, about 44 years.
All right. Mohammed is asking also about Reverend Finlay, who spearheaded the religious and humanitarian ideologies of the ACS. So I think it's in the background because so the ACS has someone like Finlay. So can you speak to that?
You're talking about Finlay from Buchanan, the ACS agent?
Yes.
And he's saying, I'm not understanding the question.
He's saying Finlay spearheaded the religious and the humanitarian ideologies of the ACS. Maybe he's saying that you are presenting the ACS people as bad people. Maybe that's what he's saying. Hey, these guys are.
I'm not presenting anything from their perspective, and I'm not really. So what I'm doing is I'm presenting Lot Carey. I am presenting Daniel Coker. I am presenting, King Peter. I am presenting our people. And I'm presenting documents they were party to. And I'm letting you know how long our people have had a relationship with Europeans and what they were doing at the time and what was going on. I really don't care about Finlay. I mean, in the context of everything. These people were not looking at us as their equals in some ways, as far as culturally and all of these other things. However, before you have the Berlin Conference and the Great Partitioning of Africa, before you have that happen, they signed treaties with Africans. This is a fact. There's too many treaties for that to not have been the case. The time that because they never had an intention of really really doing what ended up happening later, which was the full subjugation, military acquisition of Africa. That occurred after the Berlin Conference. Before then, that's not what was happening. You had a group of, certain Africans who were working with Europeans. And again, what Dr. Brewer said so brilliantly is you don't do history backwards because you'll be confused. At that point in time, Africans didn't see themselves as African, as, well, we're all the same people, we're all Black people, and we ought to all work together. They saw themselves as their ethnic group.
Ebo people, Grebo people.
They had their own country. They saw themselves as their ethnic group. So they didn't, the people of Futa Jalan, who wreaked all kinds of havoc on the area that's Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, they didn't see themselves as the same people as the Madingo and the Soso and all the other groups. They didn't see themselves as the same people. They saw those people as their enemies. So the people of the Empire of Futa Jalan are going to work with the outsiders. The people who are the Soso that were on that were in Guinea, for example, had schools and things set up there. They had schools set up. They were already working with European missionaries. They were already doing all these things. So you had a huge settlement of Soso people that could read, that were literate. They didn't see the Timini people as their own people.
Yeah.
Okay. So that concept of Pan-Africanism, that we're all the same, that is a result of our enslavement. And it's a result, it's a response to white supremacy. It's a response to people who have now divided the world, not on ethnicity, but on skin color.
Thank you. We have 5 minutes to close the broadcast. I want you to respond to one question here. Koto, Jesus loved me. David say, I love this lady for her very smart say. Edison Pajibo said the American actually did not abandon the earliest settlement. It was an unfortunate historical fact that at the time Liberia was being founded, America had a policy called the Monroe Doctrine, which forbade Americans from interfering into European imperialism in the Eastern Hemisphere. This policy was called the Monroe Doctrine. America was rather to concentrate on expanding in the Western Hemisphere. This expansion into the Western Hemisphere is called the Manifest Destiny. Let Cole elaborate.
Okay, so the Monroe Doctrine has absolutely nothing to do with ACS. ACS, by law, the 1819 law required that the U.S. protect, especially the recaptured Africans. That was a requirement. That wasn't an option. So they gave the law specified that they were supposed to protect these people and keep them safe. When they abandoned them, which is exactly what happened, this is long before this was long before the partition of Africa. And this is why I talk about timeline and continuum. We're talking about the 1820s, not the 1890s. It's a completely different world. Africa isn't under the imperial thumb of Europeans. And the individuals who were inciting people against each other were not government agents. They were private citizens who had set up illegal businesses along the coast. So it wasn't like the British military is telling the Dey or telling Gatamba or whoever, go attack these people, they're going to mess up the slave trade. It's Spaniards, it's people dealing in dirty business along the coast. So this was not the British or Americans interfering with other governments. This is them stopping people who are already breaking the law. Pirates, basically. It was considered piracy to sell human beings because the transatlantic slave trade had been halted.
Thank you. And talking about education right here on Focus on Liberia, tomorrow at 6, we're going to be here with the Justice Forum. That's we have Councillor Frederick Yeyia, Councillor Kabina Janet, that's the former Associate Justice, and Councillor Jerome Verdier. They'll be here to discuss the courts of Liberia, civil courts and criminal courts. And before that, we're going to talk about the case involving the NAC boss, the Election Commission boss. That case, we're going to talk about that before we go into our tomorrow's topic. Keep it here at Focus on Liberia, where we educate, we elevate, and promote all things Liberia. Cole, we're way out of time. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. It's 9 o'clock or after 9. Your parting comments and how do you preview the next time we'll be here?
So next Saturday, we are going to focus on the rest of this, which is specifically looking at the different legal instruments that were used. And this is, people always say we had this unique partnership. America, loved us and all this kind of stuff. If you look at the way and the laws that were written, you'll understand how courageous and how incredibly important the assertion for independence was. So we're going to now start talking about Maryland Colonization Society in the Free State of Maryland, and we're going to pick up talking about what was the catalyst for Liberia asserting itself as a republic, on why the United States did not recognize Liberia until many years later, until 1868. And you know, so people like to say, oh, we've got a special relationship. America loves us. And the historical record really just shows a relationship of subjection, economic exploitation, and then, you know, convenient interaction. It's always more take than give. And then once we get into that, we'll start talking about the presidents. We'll start talking about what happened during the presidential eras. So I'm saying all that, Dennis, to say when we have a foreign minister who doesn't really understand our history with countries. In the United States, every country in the world knows history. And it's the history that drives them and drives their foreign policy. History and interest and many other things, but history makes them understand how they got to where they are. And you have a US ambassador get up and scold a country that they destroyed and they document the destruction and their role in the destruction. Not that we didn't play a role, of course we did, but they document the way that they manipulated situations that got us into the situation where we have some of the most incompetent or, you know, people ruling Liberia today. And they act like they don't know how that happened. A foreign minister rooted in history would say, take some responsibility for this mess. You know, what happened during the Cold War, toppling regimes, involvement in upholding dictatorships. Let's talk about all of these things. So history puts these things into perspective. I thank you very much, Dennis. We will, it's not a political show, it's a history show, but history is also, you know, it's a study of human activity, and politics is also human activity. Foreign relations is also human activity. And the more you dig into the documents, the more you get to see that our existence, the survival of Liberia, was not because of, you know, U.S. intervention, but in spite of.
That is deep. Let's leave it there, and we're going to be back the next time you see us. We're going to be digging deeper, more and more into Liberian history. Again, thank you so much for coming. I want to thank our viewers for always keeping it here at Focus on Liberia. The way we do it here, you won't see it in any place on the planet. Until then, we end with the song that says, we are all Liberians, whether you believe like Kerry was assassinated or that was an accident. We are all Liberians. Whether you believe on King Boswen and South Boso, that's the same person, we are all Liberians. What we all need to do, what is incumbent upon all of us, is to do our very best to make our country the glorious land of liberty. Have a good night. Enjoy your weekend. And God
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
We are Liberian. Liberia is our home. Liberian people. Liberia.